So with us today, we have the Athletics Tottenham writers, Charlie Eccleshare, and also Jack Pitt-Brooke as well, who are also on the Athletics Spurs pod, View from the Lane as well. Right, both of you were at the Tottenham match where Tottenham lost 2-0 to Manchester City. Tottenham seemed to play well, actually, making it much harder, though, for Arsenal to now win the league, of course. So, Jack, from your perspective, there was a fair bit of noise, though, building up to that match. And it was a little strange, wasn't it?
Yeah, I thought the atmosphere was strange. I thought it became a bit less strange as the game went on. I think a lot of people went into that game really not sure whether City would be miles clear after 20, 30 minutes. But the more the Spurs got into the game, the more I think the Tottenham fans got behind the players. And so it did actually feel more normal than I was expecting. But then obviously when City scored in the second half, I think the atmosphere, it became a bit more of a kind of like a friendly type atmosphere. The Spurs
Mm.
fans seemed pretty relaxed. But yeah, weird, but more normal than I was expecting.
Yeah, Jack, I'm sorry. Yeah, Charlie. I mean, I guess the main headline post that match and pre that match would have been Ange Postecoglou. And excuse me if I'm wrong, but I swear I heard your voice creeping out and a few of the viral clips of him in a presser. I mean, he's been in quite a tricky mood of recent, hasn't he?
The giveaway was when he addressed me by name. Yeah, he has been a bit. I mean, I think he it was surprising because I think that the pre-game stuff there was a quite easy line to tread, which would have been a sort of, well, yeah, I know I'll never tell fans what to think, which is a line he said before, and I understand there's a big local rivalry, but I've got a game to win, so that's all I really care about. But instead, he kind of questioned the premise that a lot of fans would want Spurs to lose. And then he said, I'd never understand not wanting my team to win, which stoked the fires a little bit. And yeah, I think he was a bit tired of that narrative pre-game, and he was certainly tired of it post-game.
Yeah, I mean, we just want to quickly touch on the atmosphere again because I was listening to the pod and both of you were really speaking about how sort of subdued it was. There were moments of, I guess, passion, but I mean, some of the stuff we were seeing, like, or hearing about, were like Tottenham fans doing the Poznan, Tottenham fans semi cheering on for City. Is that right, Jack?
It is right. Some of that happened, but honestly, there was less of that than I thought there would be. Certainly for the first hour or so, up until Haaland's first goal for City, it was actually more normal than I thought. I know that there's been a lot of focus on Spurs fans doing the Poznan, but I don't think that's like, characteristic of the behaviour of the whole Spurs stadium.
I think it was more like it was very strange if you consider that this was the final home game of the season with Champions League on the line against the best team in the land. Like that should have made for, if you took the whole Arsenal scenario out of the equation, it would have been a really big atmosphere. So it was very strange compared to that. But it felt more like a kind of Sunday 2 p.m. game after a Europa League game on the Thursday where it's pretty flat and you're at home against Burnley or someone. And, it was that kind of vibe. So it wasn't like, oh, I've never seen this vibe before at a football game. But for what the occasion should have been, it was very subdued. But it was that manifested more than kind of actively cheering City on, I would say.
I think, is this Spurs' first new sort of, I guess, a plan B, Jack, from this match in terms of the way he set up his team? And I think it's fair to say, even from a neutral perspective, Spurs put in a decent shift.
Yeah, so all season Spurs fans have been calling for a plan B from Postecoglou, and this is the first time we saw a real change in system. So it was kind of a 4-4-2, but not as you know it, in the sense they didn't have a centre forward, and the front two, in fact, two wingers, Son on the left, Brennan Johnson on the right, with Madison and Sarr kind of bombing on to get into the penalty area as part of this like tight four-man box midfield. I actually thought it worked really well. Like Spurs' final ball wasn't there, and they had quite a lot of openings where they were just one pass away from a really good chance. But they worked very hard. They restricted Man City's ability to play through the middle of the pitch. They won the ball back high up the pitch. They created some openings. And, on another day with a bit more luck or quality, I think they could easily have won the game. And I actually left right up until the post-match press conference, which I'm sure we'll come on to. I was really positive because I thought they'd actually played better than I expected, the best performance for a while, and laid a little bit of a foundation for how they might play at times next season.
And that's on you, Min chance, though. I mean, come on. Nine times out of 10. And he has hit City bad in the past. Guardiola said it. That usually is a song goal, isn't it, Charlie?
Yeah, I mean, not only is that the one Spurs player you'd want that chance to fall to, it's pretty much the one player in the league. I mean, he's always the kind of XG overperformer extraordinaire. That's his thing. He's a brilliant taker of chances, even ones that are quite tricky. Yeah, he's got a few options, but it would have been that would have been the most interesting moment from a fan perspective, I guess, because I think instinctively, just the muscle memory would mean there'd have been an eruption of sorts. But then I wonder if there would have then been a kind of horrible realization of, oh my God, is this the goal that's just given Arsenal the title? And bear in mind, a draw was sort of the worst outcome for Spurs fans because it would have not meant they couldn't get Champions League and they'd given Arsenal the initiative in the title race. So it would have been very interesting to see what happened, but yeah, a huge moment. And I think the way it was going, I think Spurs would have held on or even gone on to win the game. I think for the first time all season, or certainly all running, City looked human and kind of fallible, which they're so good at just kind of robotically moving through the running and looking impervious to pressure.
Well, Jack, you mentioned it earlier. I think we should talk about the post-match, talk about Ange Postecoglou, who came out with some revelations. I don't know. I mean, you've written about it that do remind me of Antonio Conte's sort of last bit of his tenure at Spurs. And what did you make of those comments?
I was really surprised. I was expecting him to come in and be positive. I thought he'd come in and say, "Look, we played really well. We didn't get the result that we wanted. But we pushed City all the way. The fans got behind the team in the end. Happy with how this evening went, and let's move on for next season." So for him to come on and talk about the fragile foundations he's got here, and to really so much of this season's been about good vibes, and then so for him to come in and switch the vibes to bad was a big surprise, really. I think everybody in the room, like Charlie will agree, everybody in the room was quite shocked, I think, when he said that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, would you have sensed from his demeanor on the field, Charlie, as to what kind of mood he would have been in for that press conference? Because I mean, he did praise his team for sure. That was a good sign, but everything else after that was, well, a bit of a rant.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wouldn't have expected it from how the game went, but I think we'd been given a sense from his TV interviews, because he'd already done them before he came into the press conference, that he had been pretty short in them. We were warned, actually, like, don't expect a long press conference necessarily, because his BBC interview had been cut so short. And as it was, obviously, it then went on because we were kind of trying to push and probe. But yeah, I definitely, had I not known that, my expectation would have been kind of like Jack says, he could have come in, said, that was we've shown against the best team in the world that we can match them, and let's just forget about this whole weird Arsenal narrative, move on, and let's talk about the performance. But he didn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just looking at Spurs' last 6 matches, only just one win. You can kind of understand from a manager's perspective, Jack. There's a lot of pressure on, to try and do something with this team, to try and see a positivity post Conte. I mean, he's not the first to have a rant at the media. Guardiola, Klopp, I mean, Ten Hag to a certain degree. Sometimes it just does pile on top of him, doesn't it?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot the last few days about why this change of tone on Tuesday night. I'm for now, I think I'm willing to put it down to, it had been, it's the end of a long season. It's been a very difficult few days. He's had to deal with a lot of questions he didn't particularly want to deal with about whether or not people at Spurs wanted to win this game or not. I think that's kind of, it's annoyed him. I think it's fair to say he didn't like a lot of stuff about the build up to this game. And so my conclusion is just that all this sort of frustration and annoyance sort of bubbled over a bit. My guess is that we'll go back to seeing, positive, upbeat, let's bring everyone together, Ange, for next season. But we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, what do you think of that, Charlie?
Yeah, I mean, it reminded me of like a political candidate who keeps being asked about an issue that they don't really care about and that they think is quite trivial, but for whatever reason is dominating the build up to an election or something like that. Like, I really think he was sick of it. and it just sort of it all came out. So I don't think it was premeditated in a way of like, days in advance, but I do think he's such a experienced manager and he's a very good communicator that I do think he knew what he was doing, and because he could have easily just moved on from it, but I think he did want to make a point. I think what he feels to be a very small time attitude has really pissed him off, and I don't think he could let that lie as much as people want him to, and fans certainly want him to, because fans are coming at it from like, well, don't tell us how to feel kind of thing. But I think this does really matter to him. I think he does genuinely believe that to change the mentality of the club like he wants to do, you need to sort of eradicate this kind of attitude. That's his view anyway.
Yeah, Jack, he talks about, 48 hours being so important, right? I mean, something that's really stuck out from that post-match. Do we get a sense of like what those 48 hours pre that looked like? Who was he talking to? Where was he getting his information from? Who was rubbing him up the wrong way?
So I think a big part of it would have been the atmosphere inside the ground. Part of it would have been the pre-match press conference on Monday, which Charlie was at, where he was asked about particularly this question. I think part of it, as we've mentioned in our piece this morning, was I think there's a sense that maybe some staff at Spurs who are Spurs fans, obviously the vast majority are incredibly dedicated to their jobs, but some staff might have been joking around about, wouldn't be so bad if City won the league instead of Arsenal. I generally think that overall Postecoglou is very good at shutting out external noise and keeping focused on his job. But I think this is the one time where the overarching narrative, all this external noise basically became unavoidable, and it started to, he couldn't avoid it for any longer. And I think it has frustrated him, certainly, that this narrative has kind of dominated a time where he would rather just be focusing 100% on trying to win this game.
Yeah, Charlie, a couple of days ago, we were doing a podcast on Eddie Howe and the work he's doing at Newcastle, and we were talking about, what he actually has to do there, right? In terms of instilling a mentality into a club, so that every game they go into feels like a cup final. They're up for it every single game. To hope that if he works well with this club, that they are constantly trying to challenge for European football, connecting those fans and the board and the team. I mean, this kind of screams of what Postecoglou really sees in front of him, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because one of the big issues at Spurs over the last 5 years, since Pochettino went, has been the lack of alignment. So you don't have this synergy between fans and players and manager. That just hasn't been there, and director of football, whatever. It's felt like a lot of the season they finally got that back. And I think what's made this so jarring is that it just suddenly feels like quite a fractured situation again. And like Jack says, what's key is, this could be, Postecoglou on Friday could draw a line under this. I think he may well do that. And also the fact that it's the end of the season maybe is quite good timing, because look, by the time soon all anyone's going to care about is transfers and then preseason friendlies, and this will all probably seem like a distant memory. But it has been surprising and uncharacteristic, I guess, for this season. But yeah, that's why he, I guess he feels this was a conflict that needed to happen if everyone is to get to where he is, which is, like you say, with the Eddie Howe comparison, in a place where they are as absolutely desperate and ravenous for success as he is.
This is why I don't think he's going to pivot to going into like full Conte mode for the rest of his time at Spurs, because I just don't think you can, like, politically, I don't think you can be the kind of unity, positivity, togetherness, alignment guy for 37 games of a league season, and then with one game left pivot to being Conte and just like take a completely different tack to how you're going to be Spurs manager. I don't really think you can sell that. I don't think that would be true to who he is. So that's why I kind of see this as a sort of like slightly out of character one-off, rather than a big change in tone, because I don't think a dramatic change in tone will really work.
Jack, I mean, do we get a sense of how he feels about the players as well? I mean, you've got this manager who's got this particular style of football. Do we get a sense he has the personnel to kind of put that into place?
No, I don't think he does. Like, I know he didn't criticize his players in public on the press conference on Tuesday, but he said quite a few times recently that he's going to have to sell quite a few of them in the summer, and not just, not just the fringe players either. I do think they'll have to sell players who played quite a fair bit of first team football this season. And to be honest, well, since they've lost 5 of the last 6 in the league, and so if the players are desperate to stay at Tottenham and not be sold, they're not really showing it on the pitch, are they? So I think that every time they play badly, and like I said, I didn't think they played badly on Tuesday. I thought they played well on Tuesday, the best they have for a while. But when they do play badly, I think it's just reinforcing Postecoglou's argument, which is that he needs to get quite a few of them out in the summer and replace them with players who can play the football.
Jack and I have both been told that he was pretty angry at the players after this game, despite the fact that publicly, he didn't criticize them. So, and we saw in the Chelsea game where they lost 2-0, he was furious at some of the players, screaming at them to play the ball forwards, not to go backwards. I think, his thing is always, he's never going to call someone out for making a mistake, but he will call people out for not playing the way that he wants them to play, not taking chances, not being brave on the ball, not showing for the ball, not passing forward, all of that kind of stuff. And look, he's one summer transfer window in. We've seen with Liverpool or with Arsenal under Klopp and Arteta, that they were still unrecognisable for what they became after only one summer transfer window. There are still so many players at that club who, frankly, he would be happy to move on because not because they're bad players or they're bad characters or whatever, just they're not suited to how he wants to play. Like the way you get to where you want to get if you're a project manager in inverted commas is by building the squad to your tastes and your way of playing. So, and we're only one summer transfer window into that. There's still a long, long way to go.
But also, I mean, it's one of the things we've constantly spoken about, Jack, on this pod is finances of clubs and keeping those finances in check, right? Like, how do you sell well? How do you buy well without crossing that threshold, as we always say? I mean, do fans just basically say, look, you know what? It's not just another transfer window. It's probably about 2 or 3 transfer windows before we're really able to get this right.
Well, I think Spurs are in a pretty good position financially because the way the clubs run, they spend a very low percentage of their revenue on salaries. PSR is not a big hindrance to Tottenham like it is to other teams. And I think that, there's no secret that Tottenham have got half an eye on players who play for teams who might have bigger PSR issues this June. And of course, the stadium, we talked about this many times, like the stadium revenue means that Spurs are pretty consistent in terms of the money they bring in. Obviously, it would be better if they're in the Champions League rather than the Europa League next season, but that ship has sailed. So I don't think money is a huge issue. I do think part of the problem is that if you want to, it's all very well saying Tottenham need to sell X number of players this summer, but they're not going to sell them unless they can get what they deem to be an appropriate amount of money in. And it's so hard to do that now. Like, firstly, because, we all know that there's a cash crisis in European football. And so unless you can sell them to Saudi Arabia, it's very difficult to sell them abroad. But secondly, because PSR means it's much harder to sell to Premier League. Because 5 years ago, Premier League teams wouldn't mind spending big money on an established player who'd maybe fallen down the pecking order at their current club. But nowadays, Premier League clubs don't really want to do those deals. So I do think that Tottenham are going to have to, I think in practice, doing a sort of clear out and making money back on half a dozen players is actually going to be harder than we might think it is.
I think if they're going to do that they are going to have to sell players or a player probably. Basically, the situation now is if you want to sell a player for reasonable money to a Premier League club or whoever else, there's got to be a big risk factor to you as the selling club. And that means selling a player that you might end up regret selling. And that's a good player. We're beyond just, you can sell a squad player. Pierre-Emile Højbjerg is a good example. Spurs wanted about 25 million for him last summer. But Fulham, who were one of the clubs who were interested, Atletico Madrid for the various different reasons, but they didn't really have that kind of money to spend. And also for them, spending money on a kind of cast off of another Premier League club is no longer so appealing. So I think they might have to be ruthless and brave, I guess, to an extent, and sell someone, the skill in selling. And we've seen Guardiola do this. Obviously, it helps the ridiculous amount of money they have, but he sold players who before they were deemed completely surplus to requirements, so that they still held an appeal to buying clubs. I think it's going to be a really interesting window. But like Jack says, they're in about as good a position as anyone when it comes to PSR headroom. And so I think before June 30th, they've still got some wiggle room. A lot of clubs are the opposite and need to sell. So I think it's going to be I think look out for that period, June 16th to 30th, whatever it is. But that's why as well, it would have been really handy for them. And I think this point's been overlooked, really handy for them to get Champions League over Villa. That zero-sum game, them getting Champions League, Villa not, suddenly Villa might need to sell. And guess what? Someone like Jacob Ramsey, who Spurs have looked at, partly for, because they're aware of those PSR issues, maybe that becomes the signing they could have done. But as Jack says, that ship sailed.
Yeah, super quick. You mentioned Højbjerg. Where else do you see that sort of reinforcements coming in for Spurs, Charlie? Centre forward position potentially.
Yeah, I think centre forward and a kind of strong ball winning number 6 is really important. I think central midfield has been an area it's been constant chopping and changing. They've got a lot of players at a similar-ish level, but none are probably quite at the level to really nail down that position. And, it's easy to forget that they sold Harry Kane last summer and they didn't bring in a senior out-and-out forward to replace him. So that is still a big glaring issue. And Richarlison maybe could be the player I'm talking about when I say selling someone who still is deemed to have a lot to offer. And then another defender as well. But to me, it's that number 6 and that forward. And maybe that's a wide forward and you kind of rejig things around. But they definitely need reinforcements in both those areas.
Yeah, if Spurs want to, they can sell Richarlison to Saudi Arabia and make their money back. And there are not many.
Is that option open, Jack? Is that option open?
Yeah, there's big interest from Saudi Arabia in Richarlison. Okay. He's probably Spurs' most marketable player who they might want to sell. He's still of a good age. He's Brazil's number 9. I know he's not going to the Copa America because this calf injury he picked up, but there's interest there. And so I think it's basically, as long as if Tottenham and if Richarlison wanted to pursue it, then that would be a way for Tottenham to generate some revenue. And then maybe they'd think about, if they sold him, they'd have to go back into the marketplace and find an even better number 9 than him. There's not that many of them who will guarantee Premier League goals. But I think that is an option that they might pursue. Personally, I think that their big focus this summer should be on a number 6. They're far too vulnerable on the counter-attack. Bissouma is a good player, but he's not a defensive midfielder. Bentancur isn't really a defensive midfielder. They need a kind of Rodri type player. And I know, again, that's very easy for me to say.
Where are you going to buy one of those?
Yeah, I know, yeah. They need
get Rodri in.
What they need
without spending 100 million, that's the going rate these days, Jack.
Yeah, exactly. How much would Rodri cost if he was on the market? He'd cost. Yeah. Nobody would buy him, so it's crazy. But he'd be. If Rice is worth 100 million, then Rodri would be worth 150 million.
Definitely.
But he's obviously an unbelievably good player, kind of a unique player. But yeah, so if Tottenham could just find someone like him in the sort of 30 to 45 million pound price bracket, then they're laughing.
That would be great. That would be the greatest scouting mission of all.
If listeners have got any ideas, right, please tweet us with some ideas.
Chuck them in. Yeah, who should Spurs buy in that?
We'll forward them to the Spurs recruitment.
They'll probably buy them. Anyway, let's move on because look, we're recording this on Thursday, and there'll be a pre-match presser on Friday with Postecoglou, and naturally, Charlie, you probably think he will be asked about what happened after that Manchester City match and what he has said since then. I was just thinking about the relationship with fans, and we've said it, in this podcast so far. He hasn't been there that long. Is this the time to be getting the fans back up when you're trying to win fans' support for what you're trying to achieve at a club?
Yeah, he is really good at kind of setting a narrative. And actually, it was only a couple of weeks ago after the Chelsea game. They lost to Chelsea and to Arsenal, and the mood was pretty bad. And actually, he did a really good press conference where he talked about how much the club needs to change and how it's going to be hard, but that's how they're going to get progress and all of that. And it just kind of calmed everything down a little bit. And I do suspect he might do something tomorrow. I think, get everyone back singing from the same hymn sheet. So yeah, I think that would make sense because, like you say, you need everyone to be aligned. when it's this kind of project and mission, you want all the fans on side. So I think it will be. I don't think it will be a kind of mea culpa or anything like that. But I just think he'll be good and grown up at saying, like, maybe we diverged on this issue, but we're all aiming for the same goal.
Yeah, Jack, I guess possibly a really good time to clear the air ahead of the final game of the Premier League season, at least, away to Sheffield United, a match you would hope Tottenham should win.
Yeah, I think it's probably good that this has happened at the end of the season. I think if it had happened in the middle of the season, people would have talked about it, twice, it would have dominated the narrative for weeks. Whereas the fact is, like, Tottenham they've only got one game left, and it's not even that important a game, really, I don't think, because I think, it would take an unusual combination of results for Spurs not to be in the Europa League next season. So I think they can probably relax about that. And then, all the players will be off and then all this will be forgotten. Like, it reminds me a bit of in the Pochettino days, he'd often finish the season with a big strop and then, it would all get forgotten when they came back in July. So, yeah, probably not a bad time to have a bit of a blow up like this. But yeah, I agree with Charlie that I think he might well want to reset the tone at Friday's press conference ahead of the summer.
Yeah, I mean, Jack, you talk about the players going off and maybe having a bit of a rest. I mean, Charlie, I swear they're going to Australia for a club friendly against Newcastle. I mean, we'll talk about clearing the air. He's going to have to do that very quickly because 24 hours to Australia and all this happening. Wow. To be on that Spurs plane. Goodness me.
Yeah, I know. If you were a bit annoyed with your teammates or your manager, it's like, have a 24-hour flight all in a confined space. This should do it. Maybe that'd be the perfect play. It's like when managers lock their players in the dressing room for a couple of hours. This is like that turbocharged version. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's the last thing a lot of the players want for various reasons. They play Newcastle in Melbourne. Literally, I mean, next Wednesday, 6 days from now. I guess at least it gets out of the way, but God, that is going to feel like a drag. Hopefully, for their sake, I guess all goes fine in the press conference. All goes fine against Sheffield United, and people have sort of stopped caring about it. If this is all still rumbling on by then, and then he'll have to do a press conference in Melbourne, it's meant to be this glorious homecoming. If he's still being asked about that, then I think his patience might snap.
Yeah, well, let's finish on this because on Wednesday, David Ornstein revealed that the Premier League clubs are set to hold a vote on at the annual general meeting next month on a proposal. Listen to this: to abolish VAR from the start of next season. Jack, might be welcome news for Ange Postecoglou, who's definitely, not a fan of VAR to say the least.
No, I think he's actually. One of the things I really like about Postecoglou is the way that he talks about refereeing and technology, because he doesn't complain too much about what he thinks are like bad decisions he's got, but he's good at so rather than like moaning in the specific, he's better at talking in the general, I think, about what he thinks about VAR. I think he's been good in what he said about it this season. I have to say, I mean, from a very personal perspective, I'm so excited about this vote. I mean, I'm not optimistic about the vote, but the fact that, as somebody who is a VAR abolitionist, I'm delighted that Wolves have stuck their head above the parapet and made the case for abolition. I think more people need to do this.
Yeah, I just got this, what he says every time just in my mind, Postecoglou, just get on with it, mate. Just get on with it, Charlie. Should they just get on with it, abolish this VAR?
I mean, I like Jack, I'm very anti-VAR. Having thought, and, I've held my hands up on this before, but I was pro it before. I thought it'd be good, but I am very happy to say I was completely wrong. I think it takes away way, way, way more than it gives. And I also think if you are a VAR advocate, the best thing for that position is for them to get rid of it, because we are all complete children when it comes to watching football. And I guarantee you, after a month or so next season without it, people will be like, oh, I kind of miss VAR. I hate the fact that that decision went against my club. Can we have it back? So, but yeah, I'm dead against it. And Ange has been really good talking about it. Yeah, in much broader kind of existential terms about what it's doing for the game, like Jack says, than just kind of whinging about individual decisions.
Yeah, brilliant, gents. Let's just leave it there. Charlie, Jack, thanks so much for your time. And also, don't forget, you can hear from both of them on our Spurs pod, View from the Lane. Thank you so much for listening. Adam and the team are back tomorrow with Weekend Preview. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.